Good evening. So, Ian Hazzikostas and Josh Allen did a thing just now. Josh in a very fetching hat. And I've written some notes on stuff they've said. Really? So, it started off with Azerite traits, of course, and Azerite gear and other stuff with Azerite things. So I guess we could kick off with spec save traits. I really ought to move this over here. What am I doing? There we go. Oh my god, it doesn't want to do that at all. Should have thought about this in advance. Right, come here. Notes, sort of. Good, what is it? Afternoon where you are. Good afternoon then. Where are we? So basically, someone asked the question first off about the fact, how come we can't just have, our profile for this spec, and then we change it to this profile for this spec, and this other profile for this spec. And now the issue is, I'm going to sort of be fair and scathing on this one a little bit. My main issue with his answers is, a couple of them were perfectly justified, I think, because he talked about the fact that the cost does decay, but then they themselves... Josh Allen, actually, I think it was, but both of them talked about it. They talked about the fact that someone spent 80,000 gold to get like a 2% damage boost, which he was like dismissing as well. That's not really very much, is it? Well, actually, it is at a certain point. But he did make the point that the cost decays quite quickly, which it does. But the bottom line is that the scenarios he kept giving, where it all works fine and dandy, were all scenarios where someone needs to change spec for the long term, at least for several weeks. Now, I go back to... Now, this doesn't happen anymore, I'll grant you, but it's the sort of stuff that could happen. In Burning Crusade, in Sunwell Plateau, once we'd got, very far into the raid, I was DPS on Hazzikostas, and then DPS and Brutalis. Then I would switch to Protection spec to off-tank on Felmist. Then it was back to Ret spec for Eridar Twins. Then it was back to Protection spec for Muru. And then it was back to Retribution spec. Have I missed someone out? No, I think that's it. To Kill Jaden. So that was quite a lot of spec, and that was back when you didn't even have dual spec or anything like that. That cost like 100 gold or something. Obviously, the guild paid for that. But anyway, so as a paladin who plays all three specs, there's nothing more you want in this game. I think that's the same for everyone. I think it's mean-spirited of them not to, but they're not going to do it. I was quite surprised when I saw the question, because as soon as I saw that question, I thought to myself, oh, he's going to change his mind and do it. Because they changed their mind about... They weren't going to allow us, if you remember, to be able to trade Azerite gear in Mythic Plus dungeons. Or anywhere, actually, were they? And then they changed their mind on that. And I thought, oh, have they changed their mind again? No. They're just justifying it, that's all. You think the answer is relatively justified for triple DPS specs? Being able to spec into the generic trait, even if it's a mana downgrade for all three, is usually okay. I don't see... This is the thing, you see. Now, okay, he made the point that, all right, if you're going for World First or you're pushing your plus 15, Mythic Plus, that 1 or 2% makes a big difference. But for the vast majority of people, it doesn't. I will agree for the vast majority of players, they lose far more in damage with poor play than they're going to get from that. That's true. But that still doesn't mean you have to be doing the very bleeding edge content to get the benefit. Take me, for example. So I've gone casual, of course. So I'm no longer doing that content. But I didn't do any Mythic Plus last week either. Ooh. But we've got someone, because someone basically dropped out. So we've now got someone to go again this weekend. Now, when we do that, although we're not going to be doing a plus 15, because we're all basically casuals or outs or freshly dinged outs and things like that, we are going to be working bloody hard to even finish and get to a plus 10. For that, I need to not only play my very best, I need to make sure that any mistakes I made are not... Because I might make mistakes down to not doing the dungeons enough, so therefore I don't practice enough. And I'm not taking a shot every time I say casual. Or gnome, or any other word that I might say a lot of. But there's... I forgot what I was saying now. Oh, yeah. So I need to not make any mistakes. I can make mistakes that are down to me not knowing the dungeons well enough, because I don't do them often enough. I'd avoid it, but that's just going to happen. So I need to not make any mistakes down to my class. And then I also need to make sure, ideally, that I'm getting the best out of my gear. Now, if I've chosen the trait on my Azerite gear that's the best in general, but then we do a particular dungeon and I think, well, do you know what? That other trait would be a bit better. You know, if I was a pure DPS class and could switch from, say, Outlaw to Assassination or something, but then be thinking, but my gear's really tailored to Outlaw, I think that's shit. I think that's poor. I don't think you have to be doing bleeding edge content. You just have to be a good player doing content that's hard for the level you're playing at to want to get the most out of it. So I don't really buy that. That's not to say that I don't buy any of his arguments. I do buy the argument that it decays. Like he says, it halves every 3 days. So you could argue in my case, I could actually change it. It wouldn't get that expensive because I'm not doing it all the time. But there are some people who are. So you'd say the first half was a mess. The second half was better. Oh, dear. Did you? I mean, he talks about PvP for a bit. I went to sleep at that point. If that was one of the good things, we wouldn't have noticed. But anyway, we'll go through all the non-PvPs he talked about anyway. So, are they fixing the traits? No. That's the bottom line, no. The point is they are making everything so hard to do, you just want to have fun. The restrictions on fun in BFA are incredible. Well, let's see if I wrote anything else on this particular one, though. Yeah, I mean, my main gripe with what he kept saying is he kept giving scenarios to back up his point, but all those scenarios were people, oh, your tank's, not there anymore. You're going to take over the tanking for a few weeks. Well, what if your tank isn't there that night? So you just need to take over that night. And then the next night, you're back to being DPS again. Morning stroke evening from Australia. Well, which one is it? Get your mind up. His answer on raid trinkets, oh, well, we'll get to raid trinkets, don't worry. But in terms of that, we've got 20 more minutes of Azerite traits to go yet. So then someone asked, they're talking about new traits, of course, in 8.1. But for people who do Mythic Plus dungeons and exclusively Mythic Plus dungeons, that's not very helpful because the gear that drops in dungeons stays the same throughout the expansion. So they were asking, are we going to get any new traits? And the answer is basically, he talked about, obviously they'd already announced that extra trait in the extra spec specific trait in the outer ring, didn't they? So that will be there. So that will make it a little bit new, but that's on the gear anyway. You'll suddenly have that on the gear you have. So obviously, he didn't allude to this, but I think the implication is there. I would imagine they plan on doing a couple of new dungeons like they did in Legion at some point. So I think that would be the only way you get new ones. So I think the bottom line is, I mean, this is quite a quick one. To be fair, there's nothing Blizzard can do about this. It's just the way it works. Mythic Plus Dungeoneers are not going to be getting new traits. How can they? Because the gear's the same. So that sounds like a raid-only thing, really. Mythic Plus items will get new traits. You won't be stuck with the same ones forever, apparently. That's not what he said. He said specifically that... Well, Josh Allen, to be fair, said specifically that, well, they stay the same dungeons. And he didn't say, oh, no, we're planning on changing them up. So, where's that quote from? I don't know where they're getting that from, because that ain't what he said. So, Mythic Plus items will get new... No, they won't. They'll get new... I mean, we'll get new dungeons. Like, we got... Did we just get 2 new dungeons? I suppose it's technically 3, because Karazhan ended up being 3, didn't it, for Mythic Plus purposes? You think that the huge rise of Mythic Plus completely undermined his point because people are called on far more with Mythic Plus to change specs and roles than in raids? I think that's a fair point, yes. I think that's probably true. I But it's a problem. It doesn't really matter what content you do, does it? It's still a problem for the person. Do you know another thing he said? I think I wrote it somewhere further down, but it doesn't matter. I can talk about it here. He said that... what was it now? Oh, yeah, that was what he said. He said, if you are focusing on one spec at the exclusion of all others, you should get an advantage. But that's nonsense. You're at a massive disadvantage if that's the case. I'm at a massive disadvantage just focusing on rets. That's what I do. Huge disadvantage. Because if there's a particular fight where the raid didn't want to take me as ret, which is I always thought was short-sighted, but it doesn't matter about that. If I were able to say, well, do you know what? I practice healing anyway in Mythic Plus Dungeons. If I'd have done being a holy paladin in Mythic Plus Dungeons, I could say, well, oh, you need another healer. I'll do the healing for a bit. At least I'll be in on the fight. The fact that I didn't put me at a disadvantage. So I don't know where that comes from. He said that they would retire some traits. If they do that, they'll have to replace them. Yes, that's true. But he didn't explicitly say that there'd be new ones on dungeon ones. Unless I completely zoned out at that point, which would be surprising because I paid attention, I thought, until he started talking about PvP. As a player who works 5 or 6 days a week, you haven't felt the badness of the systems yourself, so it feels weird hearing about the issues as the game feels fine to you, as you only get 3 or 4 hours a night and one day. Well, I don't even do that, so it'd be argued a lot of the issues don't affect me, but I can still appreciate how they affect people for whom it really matters. If you have to switch to tank for one night, the cost will be very low. If it's for one night, yes, but if it becomes a regular thing, or if it's one night you're replacing the tank, the next night you're replacing the healer, and things like that, it can soon add up. Or, as has already been noted, if you're a DPS class, and let's say for one boss you want that trait, and for another boss you need this other trait, because you're doing mythic raiding, and you want to min-max it, that will soon stack up, won't it? If you're going to need to alternate between your DPS traits on your only set of shoulders at that item level for different bosses, you know, maybe dagger in the back thing, and then maybe your spec-specific one for a different boss. I really don't think it's... I mean, in that situation, I will grant you, having a different profile for each spec wouldn't help either, but it's still a shit situation. 3 new Mythic, and then they changed Archway and Court to Heroic. Yes, they did. But I'm just thinking in terms of how many sort of new ones, because the Archway and Doofer still dropped the same things, didn't they? You think he did? Okay, well, maybe he did then. It's not a major point. Respec cost isn't really an advantage to people who play one spec, it's just an arbitrary disadvantage to those who play more. Yes. Well, no, well, I don't know. It can be arguably. It depends on what you're doing with it. It can hit people, as I say, who play one spec, because they may need to change their traits on a fight-to-fight basis. When he says that players that only play one spec should have an advantage, he means, for example, me should be better has ret over the other pan that mains holy but switches to ret. I don't even see that. But I don't think it is an advantage, because from the point of view of getting into groups, it's a distinct disadvantage. They said they specifically did not want using Azerite traits like a new talent tree we can change at will. Well, they stopped us changing our talents at will in Legion as well, didn't they? See, that's the fun. See, they used to want us to change talents at will. That when they brought in the new system in MoP, it was like, oh yeah, you should be able to change your talents all the time. And then it was like, no, we don't want you changing them. So we're going to make it impossible for you to change them in Mythic Plus Dungeons. You're surprised there wasn't an allied race question? There was an allied race question, which they answered, and it was quite a good answer, or at least an appreciated answer, I think. Was it the trolls and the fat humans? No. Oh, you're trying to watch a replay at the same time as yes? Yeah, that's not going to work. Tier sets change when you change spec. Yes, they did after a while. Took a while. I think it's more a case of need to change their traits. There's no actual need here. Players are way too fickle and they base everything on the top 0.1%. Yes, but I will get to it. We'll get to the Allied race question. Don't worry, it's one of the last ones. But there's more than 0.1% of players need to min-max. I am no longer, or if I ever was, one of the 0.1% players, but I still have a need to min-max to do what is basic content now for a Mythic Raider and would have been for me if I'd have continued being a Mythic Raider, no longer is. If you got a few pieces and change them depending on content and bossing raid, how is that different from talents? Well, because talents you just need tomes to change them. Azerite, you need increasing amounts of gold. It appears they're taking away our choices. Yes, that's what they're doing. Not because they want to take away our choices, but because they want us to... It all comes down to this. Everything to do with gear makes sense if you look at it from the point of view of they want us every week to get gear upgrades, but they never, ever want us to be finished with upgrades. The only way to achieve that is to make it incredibly difficult to get the gear you want. That's the only way it makes sense to me. Anyway, speaking of getting Azerite gear, so the next question was getting Azerite gear from dungeons. It says, they said they're trying to think of ideas, which to me sounded a bit odd because I said in that video before, for me, there are 3 ways of changing the way Azerite gear is awarded in Mythic Plus. There are only 3 things you can do. 1, you can make it drop from the dungeons itself. Now, they said they don't want to do that. And actually, they said it for the same reasons that I assumed was the reason in the first place, which I'm going to agree with, which is that you disadvantage players who only want to do a few Mythic Plus dungeons. Because in order to get your BIS pieces, you've got to target certain dungeons and at a high level. That means you've got to go and find those keys. And you've got to do it enough times that the bloody thing drops for you. The second point is that he made is you're restricted to 370 pieces then, when those sort of players actually want 385 pieces. So that doesn't help. So I agree with that. But there's only 2 other ways to do it. You either increase massively the chance of people getting them from the caches, or you allow some system to allow them to be bought off a vendor for some currency, like once a week. That's it. Those are the only 2 ways of dealing with it. I don't understand how they can be thinking of ways to improve it when there's only 2 left. I mean, there's variations of them, but there's 2 methods left. Anyway, any friction that reduces availability... He used the word friction a lot, didn't he, in Hazzikostas tonight? He needs to use more lube. Any friction that reduces availability of tanks and healers is bad for the game. Yes, that's a good point, actually, yes. Because effectively it does. Because they're like gold dust. Good DPS who can also either tank or heal. Preferably tank, if truth be told. Because you usually in a raid roster have enough healers. If you don't have... If you don't have enough healers on a particular night, then that's usually pretty bad news. Whereas tanks, it's quite easy because you have a typical raid group guild has 2 tanks, dedicated main tanks, and those are your dedicated tanks, night in, night out. And then if suddenly they're not there, that's a problem. That's when, if you've got someone who can step up, that's amazing. That's what puzzles you with that. Azerite is not like talents reasoning. You've got pieces with different traits and swap them even easier than talents. No tome needed. Yeah, well, I don't get this not like talents thing anyway, because they're exactly like yeah. At the end of the day, it's abilities used to customize your character. That's what a talent is. It doesn't matter what you call them. That's what a talent is. You were unable to watch the stream. Any news on professions? No, they said nothing about professions. Nothing at all. Unless he mentioned it in PvP. I completely zoned out when he talked about PvP. This mean... Hang on. You mean make the Azerite pieces from dungeons a bit worse than from raids? Make the Mythic Plus dungeons drop Azerite piece with 2 traits? No, see, you can't do that. They can't do that. although he said he wanted raids to give something special, they are actively facilitating Mythic Plus Dungeons as being genuine endgame content. You cannot do that if you artificially dumb down the rewards in what is a reward-based game. So they can't do that. I mean, I thought, well, they sort of have done this. I mean, technically, your raid gear has a couple of traits that, because they only work in Uldir, that's effectively something special, isn't it? You know, so in other words, you can have raid Azerite gear and you can go and do your Mythic Plus Dungeons. It's all fine and dandy. Whereas if you have your Azerite gear from Mythic Plus Dungeons, that's not as good as in the raids. So technically, and he didn't even make this point, I'll make it for him, that is something that's a benefit, I would say, from a raid point of view. That's a special thing from a raid point of view. But I don't think they should artificially reduce it, because then that's like them saying, yeah, Mythic Plus is just, you know, dummy content again, just like Dungeons used to be. The 0.1% elitist figure never ever applied. It originated from the number of guilds that cleared. Well, they said at the time it was like 1% or something, wasn't it? But it was never true even then. I mean, I worked it out when they said it, and it was at a time when I could work out how many guilds had killed or killed anything in Nax, because they were trying to say, oh, only 1% killed anything in Nax, which was rubbish. It was just a number, like most stats, that they pulled out their arse. You know, it's like that saying, isn't it? 97.3% of all stats is made up on the spot. So, yeah, I mean, I worked it out at the time and just demonstrated that it just was not true. You don't understand why it's discouraging to want to run a particular dungeon, considering there's no way to target a given item anyway. Because you've got to find the key. And put it my way. This is, right, because this is, he also said this. This, it's not just me because, you know, I'm that word that apparently means people have to take a shot. So I'm not gonna like get people into becoming alcoholics. But so I'm playing in a group of a set 5 people. So let's say one of us needed Temple of Sethrillis, as that's one of the examples he gave, and we don't get the key for that. We're screwed. The only way to do it is for one of us to drop out of that group and us to find someone, pug someone who has the key and is willing to join our band of misfits -1. It stops it then being that group that we want. No one would ever ask a raid group to have to kick out one of their raiders and get a pug in to be able to let them access the content they want to do. So why should a dedicated band for Mythic Plus Dungeon? And bear in mind, we're just like the scrub end of that. There's more serious players, proper serious Mythic Plus dungeoneers, who also have their set group of 5. Why should they have to knock someone out just so that someone can target a dungeon? Shouldn't have to. So I totally agree with him on that point. You know, that I don't think would be a good solution. I'll grant you it would be a better solution than the situation we have now, but it wouldn't be a good solution. So if you have a set of 5 people run a lower dungeon cycle through it, Mythic Plus has the ability to be repeated, but only if you get the key. If you're a serious player and you need this item at 370 item level, you need that key as a +10 or better. That means you've got to find someone with that key. And that person who has that +10 is not going to want it to be depleted. Or, well, you don't get depleted these days. Not degraded. Whatever. Demoted, I don't know. You should just get a key with a level on it and apply it to any mythic. Okay, RD Frosty, that would work as well if that happened. Yeah, they could remove the RNG element of the keys and give you a level of key, and you get to choose which one you want. I suppose the argument with that one is people would only choose to do the dungeons that are more favourable for those affixes. But then there's a little bit of that goes on anyway, because let's say you've got a key and you want to find a pug to do it. If it's one that's a complete nightmare for those affixes, you're probably not going to find a group anyway. I mean, there's pros and cons to all these things, but I would agree that that's something worth thinking about. I don't think it's something Blizzard would think about. I'm probably missing a lot of comments here. I do apologise. You're mentioning PvP. Sorry, I'm not doing that. Where are we? Delete a key and try and get another dungeon. Was anything said that seemed a foot forward in a positive direction? In terms of getting Azerite gear in Mythic Plus dungeons, the only positive thing they said was that they're thinking about it. It's actually quite funny. I wrote a comment here that Law said at the end of it, that's good news at least. And I remember thinking, what's good news? That nothing's happening. Oh yeah, it's amazing news. So the best thing that could be said about it is that they are aware it is a problem. He himself, I can't remember his exact words, I didn't write them down, but he basically said, yeah, it sucks. They accept the fact that it's completely rubbish for Mythic Plus Dungeoneers with the Azerite gear. But that doesn't help us if I can't understand, with a limited number of options, how they can't just bloody well pick one. It's this fannying about that they keep doing. And this is what I've said during the alpha and beta. They lack focus. They absolutely lack focus. I don't understand how something like that. For me, solutions are dead easy. You have a problem. There's a load of solutions, okay? Ask other people as well just to make sure you've got your full list. Then you start going through each one. If there's any to discount, it's like, no, we're not doing that because it causes other problems. Fine, get rid of them. And you will be left with a small number that are acceptable. Pick one of them and do it. I don't understand this. Right, oh, we can't think of which one's the perfect solution, so we're just going to carry on doing nothing. I do not get that at all. I cannot cope with that thinking. If I worked in that place, I'd have put my head through a window by now, or someone's head through a window. It's another solution to Azerite gear, not really about non-PvP. What have I missed? They should have a bounty reward system where you can win 3 at the end of the week from your chest, and you get to pick 1. It avoids repeats and bad rewards. What would the bounty system be? How would that work? But the idea of, I suppose, or selecting a mystery, maybe not pick one as in pick your ideal one. Maybe if it's you can pick a helm, a chest, or shoulders, and it's obviously random which ones you get. Yes, if they did some content like that. But that, again, to me, would be where the vendor would come in. You once a week can turn in this currency. I mean, I suggested the Hydra core, but whatever. If people want it for their cauldron, something else. Or maybe, I don't know, something that you could turn in, and once a week, it's like you can have one of these tokens. Just like we did for legendaries. Except this time it's different. It's a slot. We can choose which slot. Once a week. I don't see that as a problem. There's an awful lot of Azerite gear in Mythic Plus Dungeons, like a large variety of it. It's not like we're going to be getting our BIS pieces straight away, unless we're lucky. Some people would get that anyway. So, imagine you get an upgrade token you can use on a base Mythic Azerite piece to upgrade it to cap. What you mean, like a Mythic plus naught? Yeah, I've seen people suggest that. I'm less of a fan of that. And I'll tell you why I'm less of a fan of that. Because it allows you to target the piece you want, to just run, because, okay, you can only run that dungeon once a week, but you could run the Mythic Naughts dungeon once a week. I don't think it would take that long to get it. I could be wrong. I don't know what the average would be. It just seems to me as being too easy then to target your BIS traits. I'm not in favour of it being too... I don't think it should be easier to get your BIS traits from dungeons than it is from raiding. And this, to me, without doing maths on it, would suggest that potentially you could. Because remember, there are ways to, put it in your favour. Like, you can make sure you choose a specialisation for that boss that gives you the smallest possible loot table. And then you can coin that boss. And if you do that each week, your bad luck protection builds up. I just think it's too easy to target your BIS pieces then. So I'm not in favour of the upgrade tokens for that reason. But even that would be better than what we have now. Again, I just don't think it's a good solution. I think there are better solutions. There were so many, we know that's a problem, but we don't know what we're doing. I think every question was that, wasn't it? I don't think they said anything positive about any actual problem. I think they said some positive things about some more cosmetic choices. But we'll get onto those as well. That's the system from the PvP chest. I have no interest in the PvP chest. Same chance as a raid once a week, and you need the token to drop in the chest. See you later, Deckfish. Why are we so averse to targeting? We aren't. Blizzard are. I'm trying to be realistic in terms of what Blizzard would go for. You know, Blizzard's, I've already said, Blizzard's attitude with gear is they do not want us getting the gear we want. They want us to get an upgrade every single week to keep us interested. They do not want us getting the gear we want, because then we can complete our gear. We can have our BIS set. BIS sets mean, oh, no need to do the content anymore. Because like I say, they refuse to acknowledge the power of cosmetic stuff. Anyway, let's get on to the next bit they talked about. So this is a quick one, actually. Someone talked about confusing traits. Some of the traits, it's not obvious from the tooltip what it does. They did say that that's going to be fixed. That was just due to, they talked about, I think just basically they took their eye off the ball on that one. So I think the strong implication from that is that in 8.1, the tooltips will all make it clear what an ability does. So you don't just see a tooltip that goes, gives you the power of Ra. Right? What does that do then? It'll just tell you what it does. So that was a fairly quick one. And the first of the positive ones where they did actually say, yes, this is problem, this is solution, it's going to be applied, it's done. The problem is Mythic Plus is spammable. Yes, they made that point as well. Ultimately, as he said, Mythic Plus dungeons are the only content in the game that you can keep spamming and keep getting 370 pieces of gear over and over and over again. Whereas in Rage, you get your one chance and so on. As a result, there has to be limiting factors to it, which is fair enough. Is it possible they're simply running out of good ideas for new progression systems? Yes, or more specifically, I think, they just don't like other ones. Like, there are other progression systems that are used in other games, and they just don't want to run it. Like, the conclusion I came to was, because a lot of these guys were former raiders of the game before they became developers, including Mr. Hazzikostas himself, I just feel that maybe all of those influential developers are all loot whores, and so they don't understand that actually you don't always have to give power upgrades. I think that might be it. The price we have to pay for a steady content stream is flexibility. We'll be stuck with everything that sucks at expansion for the next 2 years. Well, I don't know overplay how bad certain things are. Like I keep saying, I just think there are some things that are not as good as they should be. You like BIS sets, it makes passing a bit more fair. Passing is never fair. The way to pass is always to get the job that no one else is allowed to have. That's how you do it. And being a guild that will allow you to do it, of course. Right, anyway, so the next bit was on tank specs. So it was acknowledged that Brewmasters and Death Knights are too strong, and that in particular, Protection Warriors and Guardian Druids are too far behind. But here's where I, got a bit irate, because he started talking about that being more to do with design features, the way it works, rather than numbers. In other words, can't be fixed with numbers. But the problem was, that was my argument right from the start with class design. They can't just fix it with tuning if they get the design wrong. Like, this is what I kept saying at the start. If they get the design of a class right, you do not have to worry about how it's looking during the alpha and beta in terms of numbers. Doesn't matter. If the design of the class is good, the numbers can sort it, and the numbers will sort it. But if you get the design of the class wrong, or any aspect of it, you are basically screwed because you cannot fix it with numbers. And he's saying the same bloody thing, but he's saying it in defense of why 2 types of tank are really strong, 2 types of tank are really weak. As if it's a natural consequence that can't be helped. Bloody well could be helped if they hadn't kept changing the design philosophy of classes all the way through alpha and giving the class designers extra work all the time, shifting the goalposts for them. We might have actually got somewhere. They already didn't give them enough time as it was, and then they kept. It's like the old thing adage, isn't it, in work when you get treated like mushrooms. You're kept in the dark, and then every now and then someone opens the lid and throws a load of shit onto you. That's what I think it must have been like for the class designers. And they're probably the ones getting all the stick, and it's not even their fault. It's the fact that they were given a design philosophy to adhere to, which kept changing. So they couldn't plan long term. Absolute nightmare. Did they mention class changes? Yes, so they did. Not so much with the tanks. They did talk about a couple of things, what I'll talk about. I say they did. That's actually a bit of a lie. He talks in very general terms rather than specific, shall we say. Now, he did talk about, where my eyes lit up a little bit, because I thought, yes, I agree with this point, but it didn't really lead to anything positive. So he talked about the what else, it's the what else do they bring argument. Now, the problem with that is it's not a nonsense argument, but it doesn't matter, because most guilds, even good guilds, and I mean high-ranked guilds, don't give a shit in terms of who's the better player. It's always about what you bring to that fight. And what a tank needs to bring to that fight, ultimately, is survival. They need to not take shitloads of damage. Because if they don't take shitloads of damage, you might be able to drop a healer for an extra DPS. That's the bottom line. But it was interesting that he talked about the idea of good tanks being the ones who position things correctly and are onto ads and do all that side of things right. You know, the common tank features right that you would be able to do on any tank spec. And he says that melee DPS always notice that, which is true. As a melee DPS, I can tell you, I know who... See, the thing is, as a healer, you know which tanks are good at mitigating damage and which are not. As a melee DPS, you know which tanks are good at positioning and which are not. And you do notice. The problem is that the guild leadership doesn't always notice if they don't play either a healer or a melee DPS. That comment made you cringe. A few days ago, the main tank of Limit said that he re-killed Gahoon with different tanks and pretty much said the tanks are all tuned fairly close to each other. For their purposes, it might be. Maybe it is for their purposes. See, I don't know. I don't play a tank. But it might also be that it's a certain level of play. It's a bit like, in terms of talking about other specs, for example. So there's several other DPS specs that haven't been great. In terms of inclusion, there's been low inclusion, which is basically the community's way of saying these specs are not really what we want. So, of course, Ret Paladins in there, but also Feral Druids, I suppose potentially Balanced Druids as well, Enhancement and Elemental Shamans, Shadow Priests, are all DPS specs that didn't really have an alternative, more importantly, as a backup that they could change to. Like if a mage spec isn't doing very well, you've got 2 more. Deal with it. But for those specs, it's the only one they really have for that role, and they've not been great. But that being said, that doesn't mean to say that we don't have people who've cleared, Mythic Uldir. We have. It's just been very few. And the guilds that have taken those players on those bosses will have got the best out of them. And let's face facts, they'll have just let them do what they do best and not worry too much about dealing with ads or something like that. Like as a Ret Paladin, I know Fetid Devourer. A Ret Paladin would do really well on Fetid Devourer. Just staying on the boss, though. You wouldn't do well on the ads. But if you just left them on the boss, they'd be perfectly fine to bring along. But most guilds see it as, ads, we need to deal with the ads, therefore every DPS in the group should have to deal with the ads. And I can understand from Blizzard's point of view them saying, well, they shouldn't really do that. They should think bigger picture. But they don't, So I think it's beholden upon Blizzard to take notice of the way the community behaves. And instead of just sitting there sulking and going, well, the community should behave differently, and it's not the last time I'm going to say this, they should take account of how the community does behave and factor that into their design. Anyway, at that point, Blizz should instead focus on making their current progression systems work better instead of burning themselves out on new ones. New ones should not be a feature during an expansion at all. That should be for a new expansion. So we've now got the expansion. I absolutely agree. They should focus on making what they've got now better and not coming up with new ones now. What I do argue, though, is when they do they should have come up with more cosmetic-based progression systems. But I agree that should come with a new expansion, not now. So anyway, where were we? Sorry. In his view, DK and Druids are behind, and as the Mythic tank, you tend to agree with him. Okay. I don't know. Not having either done Mythic raids when it's gone live or being a tank myself. The trouble is having different skill ceilings for classes. Brewmasters seem much harder for the average player trying to do a random dungeon with one. That's how it seemed to me the last couple of expansions. I've not tried them at all for BFA. So yes, that is also possible. And again, also should be factored in. Because an awful lot of even Mythic guilds have to put up with tanks. Because tanks are not very common, even you will get bad players of certain classes and roles in good guilds just because there's such a shortage of that role, and tank is one of those roles. So you do even get decent Mythic guilds that have to put up with poor tanks that are nowhere near up to the level of the average player in that guild. And yeah, I think Blizzard should take account of that as well. Both shamans, all three shamans in the event, because if we want to go to the next thing he talked about, it was actually resto shamans, wasn't it? So he talked about the fact that, well, what he actually said is resto shamans excel when there's clumped up players and not so much when they're spread out. Now, the impression I had got, again, not playing a resto shaman, so I don't know. The impression I got is that they're just all round not great. But what I will say is it really doesn't matter what they say about what they're going to do with class design. Because I absolutely believe that they know which specs need work. I mean, they've mentioned them anyway. I also absolutely believe that they are capable of improving them. I almost said fixing them then. I shouldn't. However, where I have a problem is I have no faith that they will do so because they lack focus. If they couldn't focus on getting the classes right for launch, how much harder is it when they need to get out fixes ASAP? Without rushing. They had plenty of time when they were designing the expansion. They just left it to the last minute because they didn't think they'd have to do anything with classes. But now that it's live, they now have really short deadlines to get class. Like when 8.1 comes out, several specs are going to get changes to their design. And 8.1, whether there's an internal deadline for that, I don't know. There might well be. But there's certainly a short deadline for those class designers to get that done. And I just don't think that... I just think they lack the focus. Not the class designers. I think the leadership lacks the focus to say what's really important and what to focus on. So frustrating to watch the old BlizzCon when they said they want Paladins to be the easy class. At the time, I don't see the problem with that. I mean... It was much more of a role-playing game then. There was much more of the role-playing aspect to it. The classes were in such a mess for raiding anyway. It was farcical, really. Absolute farce. It's only TBC where they really started to try and sort it out. So when you look at raids where there's been a huge blow-up in the Brewmaster community, because some logs came out that show the difference between a bad and a good Brewmaster in terms of damage taken. You say it was minuscule. Now, I haven't seen this discussion, of course. I'm not a Brewmaster. But Ian Hazzikostas did allude to that discussion. And didn't they? I'm sure he said in it that they were saying, and again, I'm getting this from Ian Hazzikostas and Josh Allen, that they were, and these are people who are self-confessed, don't understand community feedback, so maybe they mixed it up. But didn't they say that the difference was 15% in terms of how much healing is required? That's not minuscule. So unless they're misrepresenting that community discussion, they said it was like 15%. The elemental changes look very good so far in PTR. Great. Does anyone still play elemental though? I think enhancement have got more people complaining. I think there's more people play them, to be fair. They need to stop changing classes every expansion. I couldn't agree more. I wish they would just make them work. And then when the game evolves to the point where those classes need modernising, then work on them again. Obviously keep an eye on them. But yeah, the idea of changing for the sake of changing is just... Azerite was supposed to add complexity to a spec like the weapons did. That fell through. Of course it fell through, because they said at the last BlizzCon, oh yeah, you're going to be able to target the Azerite traits you want. Can we? No. Can anyone? It's not even Mythic plus Dungeoneers that can't. No one can. It's all right them saying, oh, well, you know which one drops off the Mythic raid bosses, so you can target them. No, you can't. You do all the Mythic raid bosses you can, or heroic raid bosses, whatever. You do your raid bosses. What drops, drops. Personal loot, forced personal loot in raids ensured that raiders can't target. You can coin certain bosses, but that was always the case. Well, since coins came in the game. You're surprised and disappointed by the lack of class changes on the PTR. Well, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Just because they're not on the PTR doesn't mean they're not being done. They might appear much later. Pay no attention to the fact there isn't much appearing. I know that there is active discussion. I mean, obviously, I know that Ret Paladins are going to get something, but they're still umming and ahhing about what it should be. So remember, there are specific class designers. They have no job other than class design. They are working. Trust me, they are working. Whether what they do ends up being to people's satisfaction is another matter, of course. But they are doing things. But also bear in mind, it isn't a case of one class designer per spec, or even per class, technically. I mean, it's true there's about a dozen class designers, and there's like 12 classes. But it doesn't mean to say there's one designer per class. It don't work like that. Each class designer has a few specs which can be spread over multiple classes to deal with. So they may or not work on all theirs. Like I know, for example, the Ret Paladin one also does Frost Mages. I'm not sure what else he does. It's not just those two. So it might be, for example, that he's working on Ret Paladins and not at all on Frost Mages. You know, you're quite pleased with Ret. It's not bad because it's got an intelligent class designer on it who listened to feedback. However, there are still issues, obviously, with Ret. AoE is an issue still, and mobility and defensives are always a bit of a mangled affair. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's by far there are worse specs. I think it's fair to say, although not many. You say you really don't think Ret needs much at all. The problem with it is it doesn't need much, but what it does need is not easy to put right. That's the problem. Otherwise, it would have been done. Like I say, we've actually got an intelligent class designer. But this new design focuses on Lightning Bolt a lot, what the Elementals one. You saw a video about it. Well, they haven't got anything else, have they? Lava Lash. All you want is interesting traits in Azerite. I don't know. I would be careful what you wish for. Interesting traits can sometimes be frustrating traits. Your experience with Ret so far as your cooldowns are up, your AoE could be really good. Oh, yeah, cool. Your cooldowns are up, everything's really good. You know, the sun shines when wings are up. Anyway. Let's go on to the next one. Right, so Warfronts. Someone did mention Warfronts there. Actually, technically, at this point, he started to talk about PvP. That's when I went to sleep. Then he started talking about Warfronts. I woke up again. So, when the Darkshore stuff comes out, as soon as 8.1 launches, Alliance are straight into it. There's no contributions. Alliance are straight into Darkshore. And then they said the way it should work is a bit like the Mage Tower, they said, not Mage Tower, but the Broken Shore buildings. It's like, in theory, because when they come up depends on contributions, in theory, although they'll start in parallel, so at any one time you might be attacking one warfront and defending the other, nonetheless, in theory they could run together, but in practice, people will tend to focus on the one that's closest. So in other words, if you're doing contributions for, say, Darkshore and Arathi, and Arathi's further on, people are more likely to put their contributions into Arathi. So that should keep it cycling around nicely. So they said that first of all, so that was fine. Now he also said, because they asked the question about, people said, why can't we queue up as a raid in it? Now he talked about it being a problem with the pacing. He said the problem is when you take in an organised raid group, they complete all the content too quickly, but the buildings take a certain amount of time to get ready, so they have to wait for that, and then it gets boring. Now, he said that as if that's a natural consequence of what's going on. My argument there is that that's their design. Maybe they should have allowed some way to speed up the building of the stuff with extra resources. That's what I would have said to that. But anyway, what he did say is that they might do a heroic Warfronts. He only said might, which is based around the idea of having a raid group. You know, an actual group of coordinated players in there. Now, I don't know what that could entail. Would it be a different experience, or would it just be harder to the point where it's the same experience effectively? I don't know. And they only said might anyway. The actual difference in healing needed between the good log and the bad log was about 12.5%. Okay. Still, 12.5% on 2 tanks is 25% difference there. That's, you know, the equivalent of. That could still potentially... I mean, not on its own, all right, it's not going to let you drop a whole healer, potentially. Although tanks do take a lot of healing. I don't know. It might, actually. I mean, that alone, maybe... Probably not. I don't know. I don't really know HPS figures anymore because I'm no longer into raiding, so I don't pay attention to such things. Would that allow you on its own without other DPS behaving themselves to drop a healer? If so, then that's definitely an argument for it. Anyway, while somewhat significant, is honestly not much considering the good log had 90% of the hits mitigated, whereas the bad log had 30% mitigated, which is a massive difference. Well, that's part of the skill as well, isn't it? You're not going to tell me it's a random process, are you? I mean, ultimately, the skill of a tank, as I observe, is one, tanks know where to place things. That's nice. And how to orientate them. Taking account of, you know, melee DPS especially, but all DPS and healers. 2, to stay alive. And that's where the mitigation skill comes. Using their active mitigation properly is a skill of a tank. And then 3, knowing the encounter and the timings of the encounter so that they can use their defensives or call for defensives as necessary. And then, of course, 4, coordinating with the other tank as well. Hopefully they do more updating of the Darkshore zone. I think it not unlikely, to be honest. I mean, for a start... Well, it's spoilers, I suppose. But anyway, whatever. I won't give any spoilers at the moment. Even though I don't know that I really consider PTR stuff spoilers, but some people do. Are item level rewards going to be increased for Warfronts? Well, not specifically Warfronts, but they did say, obviously, as new content comes out that pushes up the item level of rewards that comes from the new raids and stuff, the item level of all the other content is going to increase in line with that. Or at least it's going to increase with it. So, you know, that includes everything, though. Not just Warfronts. That'll be dungeons and PvP. And even World Quest as well, won't it? Just tanks that don't think good tank is pull as many mobs as possible. Oh, yeah. Oh, I hate tanks that think they're good in dungeons because they can run through a load of mobs and not actually have threat on any of them. That always used to annoy the hell out of me when I pugged dungeons. Tank going, oh, I'm a good tank. It's like, yes, I'm tanking 3 things that you didn't seem to hold on to. Stop. And also, even if they are holding on to them, running away doesn't help me DPS them. Pains in the ass. Just grab up a death ball and leave it at that. So many tanks still don't realise they can survive while the group dies. Oh, well. What expansion had my favourite Ret gameplay? I don't know. Might be BFA. It's very difficult to say. It might be BFA, even though there's a couple of things still wrong with it. I think it's better than in Legion. Mop was alright. I didn't mind Mop. WoD wasn't very much different to Mop. I would hardly say WoD because there wasn't really much difference between that and Mop. Anyway, should we get on with what else they said? So, someone said something about allied races. Here we go. So here was the question. Yeah, but I missed most of Wrath of the Lich King. I missed the Golden Age. In fact, Ret Paladins should be delighted because the first time I quit, well, I quit the game, not just raiding, but the first time I quit raiding, Paladins had a Golden Age. I've quit raiding again. So there should be a second Golden Age for Ret Paladins. We'll soon find out. So anyway, someone asked, what about DKs, allied race DKs, blah, 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 blah. Now, Blizzard's previous answer to this had always been, well, you know, Death Knights are from Wrath of the Lich King. These new races weren't really about at the time. And all your Death Knights are supposed to be ones that were raised by the Lich King. Yada, 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 yada. And the storyline wouldn't make sense, which it doesn't. However, it does seem that they are thinking, in fact, more than thinking, about changing that. So I think they're now opening up to the idea of at least having certain allied race Death Knights, which I suppose, even though he didn't explicitly state it, would probably indicate that they'd have to change the Death Knight starting quests. Maybe they'd just get rid of them. I suppose it's possible they'll just get rid of them and just let you start at level 55 in Silly Land. You've gone off Inquisition now. You don't like having to build up damage. I was fine with that. I largely missed Wrath. I played it at the start, and it was such an awful raiding experience, I quit. And then Ulduar came out, which is an awesome raiding experience, so I gather. And I thought, oh, shit. But it didn't matter. I was playing other games by then. So, that was the first question on allied races. The next question on allied races was, are they going to relax the conditions for getting the allied races that require Legion rep? To which they said that they're going to double the amount of rep you get from world quests in Legion. So it's a bit like, no, you're still going to have to do the old shitty content to be able to unlock those. If you didn't play Legion yourself, you're going to have to go and do worthless world quests, but at least you only have to do half as many of them, which I suppose is an improvement. You think it makes sense for Dark Iron Dwarfs, Zandalari Trolls, Kulturans, and High Mountain Taurens? There already is a High Mountain Tauren DK. Is there? Oh, do you mean like a named NPC? Thought you meant as an option then for a minute. But anyway, so yeah, those were the allied race questions. Now, on to the real beefy... All right, we'll get these couple of things, because next is the real interesting thing. So then they have to raise their starting level to 60. Who cares? Doesn't matter. They can raise it to 100 as far as I'm concerned. Because the DK starting quests give you 3 to 5 levels. Yeah, they do. But also, the zones scale now in Azeroth. All right, they only scale like whatever to 60 and then 60 to 80 or whatever. But you've got scaling in the zones now, so that might mitigate it a bit. But it doesn't really matter what level. I mean, they could start at level 60. It doesn't matter, does it? That doubling of rep from World Quest will also mean that getting Paragon boxes for the mounts from Legion will be easier. Yes, this is true. That is, yes, Aaron, I hadn't thought of that. That is quite true for people who want to still farm those. Only Dark Iron Dwarfs make sense for DKs, you think? Anything can be a DK. If you can be killed and raised back up, you can be a DK. So basically, if you can be killed, you can be a DK. It's still a joke that I'm not supposed to say that word because people start drinking. Who wants to play new hot stuff, allied race, and paid for it, can't do so. You don't care yourself. Well, yeah, there is that. Anyway, Blizzard can wreck on the law at any time. Well, they've done it. They do it on a daily basis. It's a bit like, in TBC, when you go around, you do your quest being shown around the caverns of time, and they talk about reality being just, this non-fixed thing, and anything can happen at any time, blah, blah, blah. That's like Blizzard's law department, their story department. Yeah, what we're going to have today? Oh, we're going to have gravity making you fall upwards today. Great, nice one. Anyway, right, let's get on to more interesting stuff to talk about. Raiding. So, first of all, instead of the next raid being called Siege of Zuldazar, they're thinking of changing it because, one, it's not really a siege, and two, it's not actually Zuldazar. It's, I can't remember the name of the bloody place. It's the pyramid place anyway. Zuldazar is the zone he was pointing out. The actual name of the city that we're not even besieging but fighting over, therefore Battle of. Dazaralor, that sounds right. Okay, two people have said the same thing, must be right. There we go. So it's going to be Battle of troll name. Or they're thinking about it. They say they haven't decided yet. That's good, isn't it? They've already announced the raid, and yet one of the last things to be decided will be the name of the raid. Fine, okay. So what they noted was, so here's where, I got a lot of shit about this before as well when he was announcing it. They were going, oh, you got this wrong about the bosses and the order of the bosses, and it turns out I hadn't got it wrong anyway. But it doesn't matter about that. So now they're changing it. So there was going to be a different order of bosses for Alliance and Horde. To which I said, if there's any difference whatsoever in it, whether it's the fights or whether it's the order of the fights, you straight away give one faction an advantage over the other. But what he's now saying is they're probably going to do the bosses in the same order. So basically what will happen is, as you get to the last boss, Alliance will get a flashback that basically fills them in on the story they've missed. And Horde would probably get that same flashback, or a flashback explaining what Alliance has been up to for them, maybe halfway through. But they still do the boss in the same order. However, what he also said is there are going to be mechanical differences. Of course there are going to be mechanical differences, different bosses. But here's the thing. When he approached the idea, and I'm going to sort of agree with them, but also say that I think their approach is wrong. They said that, yes, okay, it's going to affect the experience for Alliance and Horde, and in theory that would potentially affect the World First race. In reality it won't, because all the World First guilds that have a chance at it are all Horde anyway. But in theory it could make it easier for one or the other. However, what he also said was he don't give a shit. And the reason is, which is perfectly valid, is the World First race is a community device, which has nothing to do with them. He said even though they are now doing the Hall of Fame, even that is divided into factions. So there's a World First Alliance. In terms of official accolades, there's World First Alliance and there's World First Horde. The World First race has got nothing whatsoever to do with Blizzard. Now that I agree with. However, what I would also say, going back to my earlier point, is the community have this notion of World First. Ian Hazzikostas himself has the notion from when he was a high-end raider. Now, that being said, and this is one of those things where I do think that although they didn't come up with it, when the community as a whole basically agrees on a thing, I think Blizzard should support it. So although it's not their thing, I do think they should support it and I do think they should care. But the bottom line is they don't. And actually, I can well see a lot of people agreeing with their stance on it. I agree with their argument. I have no issue at all with their argument. I think it's perfectly valid. But so the bottom line is, it is going to probably be easier. Well, it certainly is. If you've got a different experience, it just is going to be easier for one or the other. I mean, for the world first rate, I would have argued from their point of view, when it comes to world first, it probably doesn't matter, because the world first is still going to be a horde guild regardless. But the community does care about the world first race. I mean, if anyone even doubted it, and some people did, and still do somehow, the fact that Method streamed it all and you looked at how popular it was shows that people do care. People care a lot more about the world first race than that scabby, Hall of Fame thing. Even though I don't really want to diss that, because it's better than what we've had before, which is basically nothing. It's not like there's a race between Alliance and Horde anyway. Well, no, there isn't. No. I mean, if Scrubbusters, say, was still Alliance and they were properly I mean, okay, they had a bad one this raid, this tier. But there isn't, is there? Yeah, there isn't. Although I think there was one Alliance. I can't even remember who it was. I think there was an Alliance guild in the top 10. I don't think they were a realistic prospect for World First. You also notice they didn't answer any questions regarding the current state of faction balance. No, they didn't. It may have been, to be fair, that they didn't get asked any, or at least it didn't show, because I'm sure they'll be asked a lot of questions. They've got to go through them. I mean, I think Asmongold asked about 10 questions on Twitter, so none of his got answered. How many 20s do I have now? 1. I'm a word that must not be mentioned. Was it an OC? It may have, I can't remember. I just seem to remember a bit of blue in the top 10. That's it. Shall we have a look? Let's have a look. Just to remind myself. Let's check out WoW progress. Oh no, it's some Asian guild. Jesus Christ. Some Asian guild with some Chinese-ish maybe Korean characters in it. Now, the OC one you're thinking of was, honestly, they were in world 17th position. So in the top 20, there were 3 Alliance guilds. So yeah, Alliance are not. So it's not going to affect the world first race. I'm going to agree with that. I'll totally agree with that. The faction thing is because of it is now. Yes, racials. I think it might even be the case that Alliance technically are better with racials. I think technically they may have slightly better. But the problem is your pool of players. It's like, from a guild's point of view, and I can speak from experience on this, it was it was virtually impossible to recruit as Alliance in Legion. I've recruited in most expansions. I have never, ever seen anything as difficult as Legion for recruitment as Alliance. I could not believe how insanely... It was actually impossible from my point of view. I'm not saying, if there was some, I don't know, guilds maybe in higher positions, but I don't think any Alliance guild had a nice time of it. Horde guild, so from a guild's point of view, you can see why they'd want to go Horde. Larger pool of players to recruit from. You can also see it from a player's point of view, because they could join an Alliance guild, but what if they don't get on with it? And I've had people say this to me. They'd just rather go Horde and join a large Horde realm, so that then if they don't get on in that guild, they could join another, and they probably wouldn't even have to pay another transfer fee. So they just see it as pay the big expensive faction transfer fee once, after which, they should be set. Yeah, first Alliance guild was World 9th, and I'd say it's a nation one. I don't know what it translates as. So, yeah. So from that point of view, absolutely, it's not going to affect the world first race. Right, what else did they say? So next thing about raiding, they acknowledged that raid trinkets have been a bit crap. And they said we can expect better tuning. They did make arguments about it, talking about... Now, this is what he said, because with certain trinkets, because he did talk about, being a bit careful of sims, which is fair in a way, except the specific example he gave with I would disagree with. So he said, if you've got a stat trinket, one that provides you a lot of primary stats, he said a better player will get more out of it than a less good player, which is technically true because it's just giving you raw up stats. But then he said if you've got a trinket that just does a proc damage, like AoE damage or something, he said that will do the same damage regardless of who's the better player. That's not necessarily true, because especially if it's an AoE, or especially if it's a cone, a better player will get more damage out of it because positioning will be important. But I took the point that some trinkets, you will get their maximum out of them if you are a better player, whereas other trinkets, you'll get the same. Whereas on Sims, it just assumes that you're playing well. It assumes that you're actually playing virtually perfectly. However, I would just point out that a lot of Sims have also shown that the difference between... You earlier were talking about the difference between a good brewmaster and a bad brewmaster was like, well, someone said here, 12.5% healing required. From a DPS point of view, most specs, the difference between playing it perfectly and playing it with largely just pressing random buttons that are available is a few percent. In fact, technically, people talk about Ret as being a spec. Technically, that percentage is larger for Ret. The difference between a good and a bad Ret is a larger percentage than for an awful lot of other DPS specs. So, from that point of view, it's not really true either. But he did say they can expect better tuning. In other words, we can expect raid trinkets to be a bit better. Of course, that will present its own problems then. Because, as Hakili himself tweeted today, what happens to tanks? So let's say all of a sudden the best tank trinkets come from, well, let's just say for the sake of argument, raids. How are they going to get them? You've got 2 tanks. Personal loot. So unless you can persuade some DPS to put it on their tanking spec to give them a chance at getting it, there's only 2 people in the raid. It's not going to be easy. I talked about this when they were introducing forced personal loot. The fact that there are some players in a raid that will share the items they want with lots of other players in that raid, and there are some hardly any. Like if you're the only hunter in that raid, your chances of getting, and you're a proper hunter, one that needs a bow, your chances of getting a good weapon, quite slim. Because no one else can trade it to you. You just rely on yourself getting it. Procs can be tracked and a better player will abuse it. There's well, it depends, doesn't it? Not all. I mean, I think he was talking about proc damage specifically. Like just randomly does a burst of damage on your target or so. Like if it's on your target, I could sort of say fair enough a little bit. But even then, you know... But I think because he specifically mentioned AoE damage as well. When it comes to AoE damage, a better player will get better out of it because they will position themselves to maximise the use of it. Kings without a belf or a priest is annoying at the start. Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Tanking trinkets drops for DPS specs also. Do they? Is that only because there aren't any real proper good tanking trinkets though? That they're also useful for DPS. In other words, they're not actually dedicated tanking trinkets. You're already at the point where you're setting your loot specs what others in the raid need most for heroic. That's heroic though. If you're doing it on Mythic, I would be surprised if a lot of people did it early on. Because remember, you want your trinkets. If there's a good trinket drops off a boss, you want it as soon as possible, surely. As a tank. You don't want to be waiting until it's largely on farm. Yeah, all the tank trinkets are so shit that most tanks are using DPS trinkets. Yeah, well, that's the issue, isn't it? But what if, in a future raid, or even the next raid, there was some real good, dedicated tanking trinkets became available? Surely they're not going to be dropping for DPS. There are no tank stats anymore. No, but you could have effects that are more useful. Like either activated or procced absorption shields or something else like that. Or leech. You know. Anyway. Right, there's a few more questions we need to get through because I don't want to go on forever for this. It's already been going on longer than I intended, as always. So anyway, uniqueness in raids. Now, it's quite funny this. Someone was basically saying about uniqueness in raids has been lost because of the loss of tier sets and stuff like that. When Law read this question out, you could sort of tell he was mentally putting the word uniqueness in air quotes. Just the way he said it. But anyway, now, Ian Hazzikostas did make a good point here. He did say that tier sets are not what they used to be because tier sets used to take you a long time to get. They did. They took a long time to get in a raid. Whereas now you get them in the first few weeks. Obviously, that's an issue with different difficulties of a raid. So a mythic raider will get them on heroic in the first few weeks. And then you've got them, or you had them. But what I would also say, if he's going to use the argument that tier sets have gone because they are no longer what they were, because what they used to be is something that represented long-term progression in a raid tier, what I would argue is, so what now represents long-term progression in a raid tier? Nothing. It's your title and your mount, I suppose. That's it. There isn't anything that... Azerite gear doesn't represent that long-term progression. You know, so I don't really know why he was making that point. I mean, it's fairly obvious why tier gear has gone. They had their reasons for wanting to bring in Azerite gear, whatever it is. They still haven't said, as far as I know. And obviously, Azerite gear is not compatible with tier gear. You can't mix them together. Even if you had them for different slots. You know, 5 pieces of tier, if we went back to the pre-Legion system. 3 pieces of Azerite, well, that's like 8 pieces. Already gone. You'll admit personal loot is treating you as extremely well, but your equipped item level is already 382. But you're only just progressing on Fetid Devourer. Then it has been treating you well. Well, is it personal loot that's been doing it, or have you just been getting, presumably you've been getting a couple of Titan Forge pieces, have you? But in general, it's not a benefit to the raid, really, is it? Anyway. And it's certainly not a benefit to someone who doesn't share gear with, like, many people. If not many people have the items you want on their loot table, then it restricts trading. You miss the old system with frost marks, valor marks, etc. I don't know. I think every expansion, they seem to have something similar to that. You're still progressing on Mythic with 340 and 355 Azerite pieces. Yeah, well, I mean, they acknowledge that the Azerite awarding system is bad. My main problem is it's all right. Okay, acknowledging it is the first step to fixing it. But the fact that they can't think of a fix is just, to me, mind-blowing. There's no long-term progression in raids anyway. It's about the next difficulty level, not about clearing the raid anymore. Well, it depends where you are, but there isn't, I certainly agree, there isn't a long-term progression system like there used to be with tier gear. That is definitely true. Give back master loot, well, they should, yeah. Personal loot is only better if you're in a guild that does splits, because you can stack armor types and funnel that way. Well, the upside of it actually technically was that far fewer guilds did do splits because it was generally not worthwhile. Because you want to mainly split in the first few weeks. The first few weeks you were less likely to be able to trade the gear because it'd be an upgrade. Tier gear, but the fact, yeah, with personal loot, obviously, you know, like Mythic plus Dungeons is probably a better idea if you take all plate groups or all. But then that happened in Mythic plus Dungeons in Legion anyway. Because there you had personal loot. Tier gear conflicted with Mythic plus, so they replaced it with Azerite gear. That conflicts with Mythic plus. I don't know. You think a great fix for Azerite gear would be a new reroll currency that will give you 2 tokens a week at the end of the dungeon you reroll for a chance of just... Again, the stuff from Dungeons itself, I completely agree with their arguments against having them drop in Dungeons. Can I remember what their reason was for dropping vendors? The they're not dropping vendors. The vendors will be here. Vendors are not there at the start of an expansion. They're there as catch-up mechanics for gear, letting people catch up with gear if they've missed out, if they're just rolling an out or something. So at the point at which catch-up is required, they will have vendors again. I'm absolutely certain of that. So they haven't dropped them. They're just not needed at this point of an expansion. Anyway, should we get on to the last few questions? So on to islands now. So someone was saying, are they going to vary it a little bit? Because at the moment, it's just, and I can't speak for this, I've done one island, I didn't like it. It's just AoE the crap out of everything and mine stuff. Is it going to be more varied? So they did talk about varying it a little bit, like with extraction points and stuff like that. If I'm going to be honest, though, what I would say is that when it comes to islands, because ultimately there's only three things to do. One is kill mobs, two is mine Azerite, three is kill NPC horde players. The combat system in World of Warcraft is the combat system in World of Warcraft. As a result, people are going to do it in the most efficient way they can. So from that point of view, he said they want to get away from that feeling of formulaic, but I think, to be honest, I wouldn't have minded at all them defending themselves and saying, do you know what? It's just the way the game is played. The islands are varied to a certain extent. I mean, if you're doing them a ridiculous number of times, of course, you're going to start to see the same things over and over again. I'd cut them some slack on that and just say, look, it's the nature of WoW combat. It is limited. And so, of course, the way you're going to approach islands is going to be limited. I wouldn't beat them up about that, personally. They said something about vendors containing traps for uninformed players in PvP. Traps? What sort of traps? Bearing in mind, I don't know how it works in PvP, because, you know, PvP. Next one, while you're sort of answering that, hopefully, I'll go to the next one. So, role-playing realms, they talked about sharding. Someone noting that there's still lots of shards on role-playing realms. What's going on? He had to note that it's only in new zones. There's no sharding anywhere else. And that it is necessary for stability because there are way more people on any given realm now than there used to be in the old days. And the only way to have it stable in new zones where everyone is to have sharding. That was a simple one. That's obvious. I completely believe them on that one. Noobs might buy the wrong one. Well, that's their lookout, isn't it? I can agree. See, the thing is, I'd worry more about talent traps. There are talents that look like they're... Like, for Rets, we have Justicard's Ventures. I know Sol Sacra goes mad about it because he calls that a noob trap. They should pay more attention to get rid of talent traps than that. I don't see why that's a problem. If someone's going to buy the wrong thing, that's down to them, surely. That's up to them. You think they should just reduce the number for the weekly island cap and move on? Yeah. Well, I tried it once in a pug. I didn't get on. I didn't like it, even though we did it. We completed it, but it was a bad experience. I didn't really want to do it like multiple times a week, so I just didn't. Is Divine Purpose still bugged? Yes, I think it is. But don't worry, the bug is replicated in Simcraft. So it all works out. But I believe it is still bugged, yes. I've certainly not seen a hotfix for it, and I've not seen anyone mention that it seems to be working now. I couldn't swear to it. Okay, two more quick questions, and we are going to finish. We're going to finish in 7 minutes flat. And then it'll be a nice round hour and a half. Right, so Group Finder search by key level. So, because they advertise for BFA, we're going to get this thing. So in Group Finder, we can search by key level. So I want a +10. I want to filter by groups that are doing that. They said there's still a few wrinkles to sort out. It's not their word, but the same thing. It is still coming. I'm going to be honest. I don't know what's so difficult about it as a search thing. You know, you enter the key. You could even do you know how you enter your key on? You could just like link. I don't know. Or just put it in. It can't be that hard, surely to God, when you're creating a group or a thing that you... Well, it says you want to sort by dungeon and key. Like, yeah, that's fine. How is that difficult, though? I don't get how that's a difficult thing to do. There's a couple of drop-down menus. Or not even a drop-down menu for the item level. You just type the bloody number in. And for the dungeon drop-down menu, there's only so many of them. I don't get that. But anyway, for whatever reason, it's not done yet, but it's coming. How would I feel if they removed the damage change in talents and made talents mostly about utility choices like mobility and self-healing? Here's what I would think about that. For a class that only has one DPS spec, that would be a nightmare. We rely upon talents to be able to adapt ourselves to certain fights. Pure DPS classes, or even classes that have 2 DPS specs, can switch. I know it's not easy switching between specs because of gearing, but in theory they can switch between specs and have one spec that might be better at single target and another one that's better at like AoE, or maybe it's based on this is better for high mobility, this one better for planting your feet. When you've got one DPS spec, so basically priests, paladins, monks, shamans and druids technically, because they've got 2 DPS specs, but one's melee, one's ranged, then you're limited and you rely on those talents to do that. If the talents only did utility, then that would mean, first of all, that would not even double down, triple down, treble down, whatever you want to say, pure DPS classes, because they would get a wider range of utility if they're happy switching specs. And the other problem is that for those single DPS classes, you'd have to have all your tools baseline. And they're never going to let any single spec be brilliant in every situation. So from that point of view, it wouldn't be great. No. The final question, and then we'll take like literally 2 minutes of stuff. It says, without friendliness, that's always a good laugh, that one. At least he didn't make me completely break down in giggles by saying, oh yeah, it's the most alt-friendly expansion ever. But what he did say is with the war campaign, to make it a bit easier, he says, at the moment, when you unlock a new chapter in the war campaign, you don't really get much rep with that. It's a bit pathetic. He says they're going to massively increase the amount of rep you get from completing those chapters, which should help your alts keep up with the war campaign. He even went as far as to say, so when you unlock a chapter, you should be pretty close to the next chapter. Now, we'll wait and see if that's the case. He also talked about the fact that because you can level up in different ways now, you could level up in like islands. You could just do islands to level up. But then when you get to level cap, you want to do your world quest. You've got no flight points unlocked. So they're talking about doing a BOA book that just unlocks the flight points. Now, whether it's the flight points you've got, you still have to unlock them on one character. And that BOA book will only unlock them, the ones you had on that character, or it'll just unlock all of them. I don't know. But the idea that you could just give this BOA book to your alts, who can then learn the flight points. So if they haven't done any questing to level up, then they're still okay from that point of view. Anyway, let's have a look. Why not simply make rep account-wide? I would agree. Obviously, you can't have a situation where you cycle around 10 alts and, you know, do some world quest to get rep and you're exalted in one day. So what you should have to do instead is say, as soon as your account has completed a particular world quest, if you try and complete that world quest on any other character on that account, it can do it, it'll get the reward, but it won't get the rep for it. So you'd have to make sure you can't like double dip on it or like deca dip if you've got loads of alts. But yes, I agree. I completely agree. You know, there's far more stuff should be account wide, way more stuff. But again, I think it comes down to this philosophy. They want to keep us playing, therefore they don't want to make it too easy. They come up with all sorts of bullshit reasons for doing it, but I think ultimately it comes down to that. Or just only have your highest rep account. Well, count, whatever. I think they could do a lot more with rep, though, yeah. I think they could do a lot more with lots of things, if I'm honest. Even gear. You know, instead of gear becoming soul-bound, I don't see what the problem is with allowing it to become account. No such thing as soul bound. There's account bound. So when it binds to you, it binds to your account, and you can, you know, have some shared storage space in your bank and drop it in there and let your other character take it, and, you know, for gear. I see no problem with that, but they don't do that either. Far more complicated for reputation. It needs to be just make your ability to purchase and use rewards based on the highest reputation on your account. They could do that as well, yes, but I still think it would be nice just to have it account wide. You know, I think it is in some games. Only trouble with rep account wide is the 350 item level gear you can get from the vendors. How is that a problem though? If you've got a character that's unlocked all that, their gear is like, you know, if my gear now is whatever, or let's say I'm, you know, it's just short of 370. If I get an out and I get it to 120, and if that gear is suddenly all of a sudden 370 as well, how is that a problem? Who does that hurt? Doesn't hurt anyone. I don't see a problem with that. Doesn't matter. Me as a player has still leveled a character and geared a character up to that point. I didn't put any effort into it because I'm a, you know, C word. Actually, that can mean two things. But, you know, I've done it. Why does it matter if I want to do an alt for that? Titan Forging doesn't keep us slot machining enough. What compared to what? At some point, some alts will feel kind of meaningless. Good. It depends what you want alts for. I mean, if you just want them to enjoy playing another type of game, then you can do. I mean, I don't understand what the benefit is in artificial making you redo all that content, because some people want to make a lot. Some people would like to have one of each class. They basically have to live in the game to gear them all up. Think I'm getting my gear too quickly? Of course I bloody am. It's ridiculous. Oh, you think getting your gear in the current level pug focus pug climate will be harmful to a lot of groups? Yeah, but that's... I don't have much... I see what you mean now. So you ding straight away, you've got loads of good gear, and all of a sudden you're into... I don't have a problem with that either. I mean, that's those groups' fault, really. I have no sympathy for pug groups. Pug groups are abomination. And it really makes no difference if they become more of an abomination is an abomination. If it becomes more of an abomination, well, for me, it's still an abomination. Obviously, that's my point of view, but, you know. Account band gear, oh dear, creates some wonky issues when people are gearing insanely fast because they make the same class, or in WoW's example, all leather wearers. Yeah, good. No issue with it. I have zero issue with that. If they want us to keep us, because here's the thing. So let's say you're a raider, and a tier comes out. So in 8.1, they're going to change a load of specs, and let's say, or the new raid comes out, and all of a sudden it doesn't favour your class, but it favours another one, and you're the sort of person that is happy to change class. Well, if you have it at 120 and you can just pass it a load of gear, what's the problem with that? It also, when you talk about, for example, when some people make the same class, or in WoW's example, all leather wearers, you wouldn't have to do that. You've got to bear in mind, even as a plate wearer, when I was a raider, would have access to mail gear, leather gear, cloth gear if I want. You know, if it was going to like off spec, you know, it could be just roll for it if you want to pass it to an alt. You could pass cloth along if you're a plate wearer. You know, I don't have an issue at all with it. It would help people re-roll, which would improve the strength of the raiding and dungeoning. Any end game content scene where people, for whatever reason, needed or wanted to change class I just think that would be fine. But that's an opinion. That's just my opinion. I just don't see any downsides, and I see plenty of upsides. Looking on the Blizzard side, if you get the 350 item limit, it takes away from what they want us to do. Yeah, because what they want us to do is to chase. They want us in the hamster wheel chasing after the gear that we never get, or like a donkey with a carrot on a stick. That's what they want. They want us. Oh, it's nearly there. I'm going to get it. 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 And they don't. They want us to never realise we're not getting it until the next expansion's about to come out. That's what they want. I don't have any sympathy for that either. Right, last comment, and then we're finishing. It says, I do think the levelling is certainly weaker in BFA than it was in Legion. I feel less compelled to level up more toons in BFA. I mean, that can be largely subjective. I do think levelling in general is a good thing in World of Warcraft in general. The only expansion, ironically, that I just straight up did not enjoy the levelling experience was Burning Crusade. Even though I enjoyed the expansion. But I generally quite like the levelling experience. Whether or not I personally feel that it was... I don't know. I think I probably might err on the side of possibly it was a bit better in Legion because you had the zone that was entirely for work. I mean, technically we have new zones, but we don't really have the level cap zone like we did with Suramar. That doesn't exist. And I think that was a good thing. Much better to reroll than a sub. Yes, it is. Right, I said that was the last question. I then lied. But I am going to have to finish it here because we've now gone for over an hour and a half. I'm very bad with timing. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Obviously, we'll go again on Tuesday where we can just talk about whatever the hell. And yes. So thanks for coming on. I hope you had a good discussion. And until next time, I will see you later.